Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats as we are about to begin the evening.
I'll be very careful. Friends, I said a word and it went dark like that. That made me feel more powerful than I really am. Good evening and welcome to JW3 for this, the 9th annual Spiro lecture. Some of you have been here for every single year. I would say put your hand up, but I can't see you. So I know at least one person who has been here every single year. So a particular warm welcome to our special guests, the indefatigable Nitsa Spiro, of course, and her family. Her family and her many friends who are here this evening. If we've not met before, my name is Raymond Simonson. Actually, even if we have met before, my name is still Raymond Simonson. And I'm proud to be the CEO of this wonderful institution, the only Jewish community centre and cultural venue of its kind in the UK. I have sincere apologies from Sir Trevor Pears, the Executive Chair of Pears Foundation, whose idea it was originally to set up this annual tribute lecture. Maybe that's him. This is not how I was expecting this evening to start, let me tell you. It was Sir Trevor's idea to set up this annual tribute lecture in honour of Nitsa and the now late and much, much missed Robin Spiro, Zichrono Livracha. And it's Pears Foundation's generosity that has sponsored this series since we began in 2014. Sir Trevor and his colleague Shoshana Boyd-Gelfand, who would prefer to be here, send their warmest regards to you, Nitsa, and their love, and their humble apologies to you all for their absence. In my role as CEO of JW3, and those of you that have been to events here before will know this, I don't actually stand on this stage that often. In fact, if truth be told, out of the thousands of events that we run every year, there's only a handful that I can actually come to myself. I'm usually locked away in an office doing the boring stuff. But of course, the annual Spiro lecture is not an ordinary event. It's our way of honouring a couple who can be described as anything other than ordinary. As many of you in the audience will know, I'm sure most of you, every year we put on around 6,000 or so events and classes and talks and performances, but only one event in our entire calendar every year has the unique claim to be an annual event named in honour of community legends. And those legends are, of course, Nitsa and her late husband, Robin. Nitsa, yeah, exactly. As I'm sure most of you know, Nitsa, along with Robin, through the creation first of the Spiro Institute for the Study of Jewish History and Culture, followed then by Spiro Arc, have been leading innovators in Jewish cultural history and Hebrew language education for now over 50 years. As I've often said about them publicly, the Spiros will always be seen as true chalutzim, pioneers in the Jewish community. They've inspired many thousands of students from every corner of the community, as well as non-Jewish people from all over the UK and beyond. In fact, long before there was an established UK Jewish Film Festival, or the Jewish Music Institute, or Seret, the annual Israeli Film Festival, long before all of those existed, Nitsa and Robin came up with all these kind of ideas themselves. They ran hugely successful festivals, evenings, and events, bringing Jewish music, Jewish film, Jewish culture, Jewish history and learning from around the world to new audiences. From the late 70s, when Robin first had his vision in Oxford, he and Nitsa blazed a trail in our community that created the fertile ground that eventually enabled the establishment of JW3 as the first JCC of its kind. Honestly, without their pioneering work, I don't believe the community would have been as ready to embrace the idea of JW3 in quite the same way that it did from the moment we opened our doors 9 years ago. And I'll be forever grateful to you for that. And if you think that Nitsa would have been satisfied merely being a trailblazing pioneer, creating and running Jewish organizations, and then just bringing in others to do all the teaching of the classes and the facilitating of the sessions, then you'd be very much mistaken. These achievements would have been enough for any normal person, Dayenu. But as I said, Nitsa is no ordinary woman. She's a superwoman. So she herself taught thousands of students herself over the past 5 decades, taking personal responsibility for connecting them to Jewish history, to Jewish culture, and to the Hebrew language, ensuring the continued vibrancy of the Jewish people. I don't think there's anybody else in our community that has done something like that, Nitsa. And somehow, despite possibly being the hardest working woman in the Jewish community, you still even managed to find time to create a truly wonderful family with Robin of, and I always worry I'm going to get the numbers wrong because I haven't got the update, but 8 children and 14 grandchildren, no new ones recently? Okay. And of course, many of them are here this evening. As always, give us a wave if you're a member of the Spiro family. It's wonderful to see so many of you here. We love the fact that you each carry a similar sense of responsibility to your grandma, to your grandparents and your parents, emulating their example. Nitsa, I really am delighted that you're back here again for this evening, for the annual tribute, to honour your unique contribution to the British Jewish community and to the Jewish people. It's something absolutely worth celebrating. Although this year's event, of course, is tinged with sadness, seeing the empty seat in the front row where Robin would have normally sat, and we feel his presence, especially on evenings like this. So, on to this evening's lecture and our lecturer, our guest speaker, Professor Eli Vakil, who has flown in from Israel especially to be with us. Professor Eli Vakil is the Professor Emeritus and former departmental chairman in the Department of Psychology and the head of Memory and Amnesia Lab at the Gonda Multidisciplinary Brain Research Center at Bar Ilan University. He's also the director of the Rehabilitation Center for Veterans After Traumatic Brain Injury in Jaffa. Now, if I read even just the bullet points from Professor Vakil's illustrious career since achieving his PhD in clinical neuropsychology in 1985, well, we'd just be here all night and we wouldn't get to hear him speak. So, with your permission, just a very brief introduction. All I'll say, he's one of the most respected experts in the field of neuropsychology in the world, and he's our expert. A few years ago, some of you will have been here for the annual Spiro lecture, where our guest speaker that evening was the phenomenal Jewish educator Avram Imfeld. One of the striking messages that Avram delivered in this room that evening was there is no such thing, according to him, as Jewish history. No, he insisted again and again, Jews don't have history, we have memory. And that's why the verb that appears most in our ritual is zchor, zecher, zikaron, remember, remember, remember. So it is fitting that this evening, Professor Vakil will be speaking about remembering and forgetting and their implications for collective memory. It's therefore my absolute genuine honour to welcome Professor Vakil to JW3 to give the 9th annual Spiro lecture. So Nitsa and dear friends, without further ado, please give a very, very warm welcome to Professor Eli Vakil.
Wow, it's so impressive. I'm really honored and pleased to be here, the speaker this evening with such an important and meaningful occasion. And first of most, I would like to thank Nitsa. I don't know how you found me, but after the first email, I couldn't say no. Probably you all have had a similar experience with Nitsa. You can't refuse. So I didn't know what exactly I'm up to, but she said, listen, I listened to one of your interviews or whatever, I don't know. I would like you to come and be the speaker. And I said, okay, I'll be happy to do that. And it's such a great pleasure meeting you and knowing you and meeting some members of your family. So these are the thanks. I want also to thank Judy for the logistics and helping with all the arrangements and to enable this evening. Thank you. Let's start with my talk. As I was introduced, thank you with the kind words. I'm a neuropsychologist from the Department of Psychology and the Brain Research Center in Bar Ilan University. This is actually a topic which I'm not usually talk about in scientific lectures or conferences. I just came directly from a conference in San Diego, so my talks are strictly scientific. So I need to give you some background. How did I get to this, talking about this topic? Okay, 1 second. Okay, so just a brief introduction. About 8 years, 10 years ago, a writer from Israel by the name of Michal Govrin called me and asked me and said, listen, Eli, I listened to I was attending some of your talks on memory, and I would like you to join a research group in Van Leer Institute in Jerusalem that is going to talk about transmitted memory and fiction in the context of Holocaust. I said, well, I have nothing to do with the Holocaust. I mean, of course, as a Jewish person, but I never studied Holocaust. I never studied collective memory. She said, yes, but I think you'll be an important contribution to the group. I said, okay, so who are the group members? And she said, well, we have artists, we have painters, we have musicians, we have philosophers. I say, you see, so I don't fit into this crowd. I'm a scientist. She said, no. You know what? She was persuasive, almost as Nietzsche. And she said, you know what? Why don't you try 2 or 3 meetings, and then you'll decide. And then I joined the group. And it was one of the most important experiences in my life, because I was introduced to a different world, and I had the opportunity to integrate my knowledge on memory processes, usually on individual processes, impairment of memory, that's what I study, amnesia, and this kind of, and head trauma, and integrate it and find the similarities between individual memory processes and collective memory processes. And these, you know, when 2 worlds merge, it gave me a lot of insights, which I'm going to share with you. So you don't have to accept everything, all of my conclusions, but at least I hope that will make you think about some of, sometimes maybe provocative statements which I'm going to make. So I'm going to start with a question, a simple question. What do we commemorate on Memorial Day? Either we're talking about private, individual, your side, or a collective, like Holocaust Day. You know, in Israel, we have the tzfira. We have these 2 minutes of silence that everything stops, the traffic, people just stand up for 2 minutes. And I made a little survey with my students, and I asked them, tell me, what do you think in Holocaust Day? What do you think in those 2 minutes? What goes through your mind? What do you do? 2 minutes, okay, silence. You stand up. Some would tell me, okay, I think about the 6 million Jews that were killed in concentration camps. I say, what does it mean to think of 6 million Jews? I mean, what, you started counting 1 to 6 million? What does it mean you think of 6 million Jews? Someone else would say, well, I run in my mind all these photographs from concentration camps, all these horrible photographs that I've seen in museums and Holocaust museums, and just looking and thinking about these pictures. And I say, is that all? And then what? Okay, so these 2 minutes passed. Are you different? Is there anything different? So what commemorating means? And that's a question that I'm hoping or trying to answer in this talk, First of all, I must confess that as a scientist, I'm usually involved in understanding the neurological mechanism, the processes, the cognitive processes of cognition and of memory in particular. But what is the purpose of all these processes? We don't know. You know, our brain arrived without a manual telling us what is the purpose of each section. So we have to discover it. And in this sense, it's a kind of a reverse engineering. So we try to guess why we have these capabilities and why do we have memory, what it serves, what is the purpose, the goal of memory. So my lecture is divided into two parts, which are, of course, linked to each other. On the first part, I'm going to talk about 4 major goals, which I think in our scientific community we talk about the goals of memory. And then I'll be talking about some memory processes and how they reflect on these goals. And I'm going to switch from individual processes to collective memory. And I was amazed to discover, I'm not a collective memory researcher, but I was amazed to discover the similarities between individual and collective memory. So what is, first of all, collective memory? So collective memory refers to the shared pool of memories, knowledge, and information of social group that is significantly associated with group's identity. Collective memory can be constructed, shared, and passed on by large or small social groups, such as nation, communities, or families. And we might be involved in several collective memories, the family one, the national one, our community. And as I said, I was amazed to discover the similarity in these processes. So, as neuropsychologists, when we try to understand certain mechanisms, we always start with the most basic and fundamental assumption that these capabilities that we have in our brain, first of all, they have a survival goal. Evolution. We need to survive. So when we talk about the individual survival value of memory, so memory allows person to avoid situation, places, or people that constitute a danger to his or her existence. And we share that with animals. Animals instinctively avoid places where they were in danger and remember to return to places where they have found food in the past. I have some of my colleagues studying memory in birds, for example. Apparently a bird could hide food in the middle of the forest, in a particular tree, live for a few months, and then come back to the exact tree, exact location where the food was hidden. And that's amazing. So that's how some of my colleagues have like a small bush in their lab, which is impressive. So that was individual. But what is the survival value of a collective? So again, I'm going to focus on in the context of Holocaust, because I think that one of the most important and traumatic events in the last generations that our people have experienced. So strengthening the security resilience of the State of Israel is one of the lessons of the Holocaust. No more. A legitimate military survival response. And now I'm going to quote from the Chief of Staff in 2008, Gabi Ashkenazi, who visited Auschwitz. And that's what he said. I come as a Chief of Staff of the IDF on the eve of the Holocaust Day and the eve of the 60th Independence Day of this country to state, never again. Jews will never again look helplessly in terror at barbed wire fences. We come to remember and not to forget, and to say to them and in their memory, never again. So that's a basic instinctive survival goal while we have memory as individuals and as a collective. let me a second be ahead of myself and just tell you that if we just focus on that, that could be very dangerous. And unfortunately, what we have seen in Israel sometimes, that we, or politicians might involve and might mention the Holocaust in so many contexts that are not really appropriate. I mean, starting with the Iranian nuclear threat to much less important things. And the consequences of focusing on this message only, it could be very dangerous, and I'll come back to it. But keep that in mind. Although we perfectly understand the role and the importance of the survival value of memory as individuals and collective. The other obvious goal of memory is the accumulation of knowledge. And again, as individuals, and it's very interesting to note the difference between human beings and animals. Man's unique ability to think in abstractly and in symbols allows the transfer of information between people and across generations. That is not based solely on observation, as in case of the animals. So I have a spiral versus a circle. So human being is like a spiral. So we can learn from the experience and the knowledge that our ancestors have accumulated. So when I start to study memory and brain, I didn't start from scratch. I read books, I read papers, I read other people's experiments, and based on that, I conducted my studies. Animals, however, definitely learn, but it's as a circle. So they learn throughout their lifespan, but they cannot transmit it because they cannot write it, they cannot verbalize it, and transmit it to the next generation, so the next generation would start at a different level. That's why, if you look into even 100 years, 200 years, 300 years, how much the human society have developed and improved and changed through these years. But if you look into chimpanzees, which share with us about 98% of the genome, they basically behave the same way as they behaved 300 and 500 years ago. Because they learn how to get food, how to get water, how to protect themselves. But that's it. So just by observation, they cannot transmit this information from one generation to the other. And quoting the famous quote by Newton, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." So when we talk about the accumulation of knowledge, of course, it's not only on an individual level, but it's also on the level of a society. Okay, that human makes progress because we study, we have science, we have medicine, technology, and more. And documenting the event that preceded the Holocaust, if I'll take it to this context, during and after, is critical process to perhaps try to understand what happened and try to prevent, okay, reoccurrence in the future of actions such as the Holocaust. So knowledge is something which is very, very important as, again, as individuals, as a collective. Now I'm moving to something maybe that is not so intuitive, and that's the contribution of our memory to our identity. So if you think about it, if I'm asking myself who I am, so I'll be talking probably about, as I was introduced, what I did in my past. I studied there, I went here to universities, I have so many children, grandchildren, etc., etc. So that's part of my identity, my knowledge, my experiences. However, a very, very important discovery about 2 decades ago from a colleague of mine, Dan Schachter from Harvard University, who tested individuals with amnesia. And they had great difficulties remembering what they've done in the last few years, and they became amnesics. But to his astonishment, what he found, that when he asked them to imagine the future, okay, Joe, tell me, what are you going to be? Tell me what's happening with you like in 5 years. It's almost impossible. So apparently they were not able, the same people that have difficulties moving backwards on time have difficulty traveling to the future. So brain studies show that the mechanism that allows us to remember the past is the very same one that allows us to imagine the future. Thus, a person's identity is defined not only on the basis of the past experiences, but also on the basis of his or her ambitions and dreams for the future. Obviously, for me, my identity mostly is determined by my past. Well, I mean, in my future, I don't have so many big ambitions. But for a youngster, a younger person, again, the proportion are slightly different. And for that individual, younger individual, the past, okay, he went to high school. But what determines or makes his identity or her identity is the dreams for the future. What do I want to be when I'll be grown up? A doctor, a lawyer, a businessman? Do I want to travel? Do I want to have a large family, small family? So all these things actually create and form our identity. That's as individuals. But similarly, as a collective. Excuse me. Societies and nations face the issue of forming self-identity and therefore create rituals to remember events from the past. Some of them are happy, such as the Exodus from Egypt on Passover and Independence Day. However, there are some of them are sad, such as destruction of the temple in Jerusalem on 9th of Av and the Holocaust Day. Ambitious and dreams, so that's the past. Ambitious and dreams for the future also shape nation's identity. The desire to return to the land of Israel, to Zion, and establish a Jewish state has affected all communities in the diaspora. So again, so a nation also, the identity is formed by the shared past, but also by sharing similar dreams. And one of the toughest issue is, I refer to it as moral lessons. In a way, moral lessons is counterintuitive. This is a memory goal that is apparently uniquely human, as it is sometimes required going against survival, okay, and instinctive drives. So, for example, sad to note that most studies show that better children could have the choice when they'll grow up and they'll be grown up and parents, how to behave to their children. On the one hand, they could decide, well, I experience aggression at home. I'll never raise my hand on my child. That sounds logical, right? But unfortunately, research shows that that's not the case. Most of them become battering parents in their adulthood. So the same experience could lead you either to be this or to be that. So there's nothing, it's not, the mere experience does not direct you what conclusions to draw from this experience. You need kind of a moral code, and that's what I'm saying here. A guiding moral code is required, since we cannot trust that the natural processes would necessarily lead us to the correct conclusions. I don't know if there is such a thing as correct. Maybe for some of these people to be aggressive. It's a survival rule. But what I'm saying is that the mere experience, the fact that a person experienced something, doesn't automatically dictate the conclusion. The same thing on a nation level, okay? From the exact same event, different nations, like different people, can reach positive conclusion or adopt different lessons. The experience of slavery and redemption of the Hebrew people in the land of Egypt in itself could have led to opposite conclusions. Oppression of the minority, you might say it makes sense. You know, when you have a minority, you should be worried. They might rebel, they might overtake the country. So be very, very aggressive. Or the protection of the minority. Interestingly enough, Judaism chose the latter. Let me quote a few verses. You shall not wrong a stranger or oppress him, for you were a stranger in the land of Egypt. We could have learned a different lesson from being slaves in Egypt. But no, the Torah tells us, no, you should be careful. You know what it means to be a minority. You know what it means to be a slave. Don't inflict on other people what you didn't want to be inflicted on you. And you shall now not oppress a stranger, for you know the feelings of the stranger, having yourselves been strangers in the land of Egypt. The stranger who resides with you shall be to you as one of your citizens. You shall love him as yourself, for you were a stranger in the land of Egypt. Think how easily we could have reached the opposite conclusions for being slaves in Egypt. But no, the Torah is telling us, no. This is the moral code. You should learn not to do the same thing. Even someone or a nation or an individual treated you not in an appropriate way, you should not do the same. So as I said, moral lessons is something very, very problematic because it's not automatically dictated by the facts. It's a conclusion that you have to draw, or you need to teach other people to draw these conclusions. So I thought of, I don't know if some of you are familiar with Aaron Appelfeld. He's one of the very important writers about the Holocaust. He passed away a few years ago. By the way, he came to our group and gave us a lecture, and his son is a painter, and he was a member of the group. And he told us fascinating stories, but one of the sentences he said, but there was love there. At the concentration camp, there was love. He said, yes, I'm aware people were killed, people were tortured, but I also saw how a person starving, but he saw his neighbor, his friend, weaker than him. He would share his piece of bread and give him half. Yeah, so that's love. But you need to choose. Appelfeld chose to see that and to remember that. So again, that's a moral lesson that you have to decide what you want to take from that same situation. And I'm glad, we all know that there are many museums all over the world, one of them, the Museum of Tolerance, that deliver exactly the same message. That's one of the things that we should learn maybe from the Holocaust. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about some memory processes and see how they enrich our understanding and of what I've said before and reflect on what I've said. So first of all, if you'll put human's brain versus the computer, so at first glance, you might conclude that the computer has many, many, many more advantages than our brain. It's faster, can accumulate much more information. For example, no chess player can win now these days a computer. So you might think, yes, that the computer has advantages over the brain. But I should remind you that the human brain created the computer. The human brain is the one that keeps improving and making the computers more and more sophisticated. No computer has created the human brain yet. So the apparent disadvantages of brain compared to computer are actually advantages. Because as I'm going to show you, although they look as disadvantages, as weaknesses of the brain, but there eventually are advantages. That's what we call today neuroplasticity or brain plasticity. They're more adaptive. And these are just examples of few books. By the way, this book, you know who gave it to me as a gift? Nitza. Suddenly she said, well, I found an interesting book. I thought I'll send it to you. And it's exactly the kind of books I'm reading because I'm very much interested, as a rehab psychologist, I'm very much interested in brain plasticity. Okay? But there are many papers, and it's a huge area of research, brain plasticity. The computer has no plasticity. So let me talk about these weaknesses and discuss the advantages of these weaknesses. A month ago, there is in Israel an exhibition of Monet in the town of Holon. So I went to see it. And then I came across this picture. This painting by Monet. And next to it, there was the picture, the photograph. And there was there a paragraph which I said, wow, that's exactly so accurate. Talking about the difference between the crisis that all the Impressionists went through when they started the camera and photos, because it's even better than the best painting reflecting reality. But no, that's exactly what our brain does. It's not just a mere photograph of the reality. It's an interpretation. That's why it's impressionism. It's my impression from the world. It's already, and we should keep that in mind. I just put another example of Van Gogh, Starry Nights. And so that's a real picture, a real photograph. But that's Van Gogh. Is it more accurate? No. But that reflects the way he saw the evening. That's the way he saw the stars at night, with whatever it means. So, and that's one thing we should remember, that our brain, whatever we remember the interpretation of what we're perceiving. We don't remember the real objective fact. There is no such a thing. We remember our interpretation. That's what we have in mind. And we're going to see the consequences of that. So one of the consequences of that is that sometimes this fictitious memory, yes, over the last 4 decades, sufficient evidence has accumulated that memory bias can arise, for example, due to prejudice. In a series of laboratory studies, researcher Elizabeth Loftus, she is really the one that started these fields of memory and eyewitness. We have, at least I know, one judge in the crowd. And has shown that eyewitnesses tend to attribute acts of robbery or thefts to people of African American descent, even though the white people were actually those who had committed the acts. And it's frightening. I have a whole lecture on memory and eyewitness, and I'm quite often invited in Israel to give a talk to judges. And they're always shocked. They say, but it's impossible. If I'll take this person he's an honest person. Why would he lie? Why would he say that the African American or the Ethiopian guy stole the money? He's an honest person. But it's okay. So if I'll take this witness to a polygraph, what would be the results? And I say, the result will be that he's saying the truth. Why? Because that's what he believes that happened. He's not trying to lie. But we're making shortcuts, and we interpret. That's our impression. We interpret the world, and that has sometimes some very difficult consequences. In many occasions, it helps us to make fast and quick decisions based on our knowledge and experience. But sometimes it's misleading. But we should be aware of that. What about fictitious memories as a collective? That's a tricky one. Recollection is a type of reconstruction in which different interpretations and social influences are encapsulated and not necessarily in a factual or accurate description of the details. In the final analysis, society, like the individuals, behave according to their story, to their narrative, that it tells itself. Therefore, except for legal consequences, there is no really meaning, and there is no need to distinguish between memory, supposedly objective, that did happen in reality, and fictitious representations, subjective versus versions. Okay? And since both are true of a person, or of the person of the society, so we should remember that. So we, as communities, as nation, we live according to our narrative, to our story. I must quote, I don't know if you're familiar with Ahad Ha'am. He's one of the writers and philosophers of the Labour Party in Israel. I mean, he passed away many years ago. And he had an essay on Moses. And remind you, he's not a religious person at all. And he said something like that. I mean, I encourage you, I'm sure that there is a translation in English of this essay. And he says something fascinating. He says, well, Moses, that we know from the Torah, I'm not sure if he really existed. I don't know if in reality there was such a person. But that's a story we tell ourselves. And he said, you know what? His impact on civilization, on the Jewish people, on the Western world, was this fiction has such a greater impression on the world than so many other Moseses whom I know that really existed in reality. So it doesn't, the fact if they really existed or it's our narrative is irrelevant. That's a story we tell ourselves, and according to that, we develop. I mean, there are many studies talking about how collective memories change over time. So the collective memory of people can change over generations. As a recent study showed that both young and older American cites the US bombing of Japan as a critical event in World War II. However, older adults, those who lived through the war, rated the bombing quite positively. Okay? The bombing ended the war. They saved American lives. While younger adults rated the bombing as negative. The bombing killed, injured thousands of civilians. The war would surely have ended soon anyway. Thus, collective national memories are not fixed, but they change over time. Just like for an individual, so are collective memories. There is a new term in our literature of memory literature and in general brain science called reconsolidation. And that's an interesting process. Apparently, when we acquire knowledge, it goes through a process we call consolidation, and it becomes a stable memory creates a stable memory traces, I mean, releasing of or creating new proteins in our brain, etc. I won't go into the chemistry of it. But the interesting fact is that once these memories are retrieved, now they are vulnerable and they could change. So now you could introduce some new information, add to the previous information, and now what you'll find a storage of a reconsolidation of a new information. Okay? So, and I mean, it might sound trivial, but it has huge implications, therapeutic implications, for example. When retrieving previously stored information from memory, this information becomes subject to the influence of new information that may be combined with the old information. There have already been reports of attempts to put reconsolidation process into clinical use. For example, people who have experienced a frightening event which led maybe to post-traumatic stress disorder, to PTSD, when this event returns to awareness, while the person is simultaneously exposed to relaxing information, a reconsolidation takes place that allows storage in their memory of an experience that is now perceived as less frightening. So which means that our memory, again, unlike computer, if whatever you stored in your computer is now, you retrieve the file and the file has changed, you might say, wow, I had a virus probably. Okay? But in our brain, no, that's what always happens. It always changes. And that's, if you want, that's the optimistic message. Think of it. We can change. It's not forever. If we experience something bad, we can change the interpretation, we can change the meaning of this expression. In psychology, we call it reframing. We can reframe this. Are we changing the facts? No, we're not changing the facts, but we're changing the interpretation of the event. And that's something very hopeful. Now, as a group, collective memory signifies narratives of past experiences created by and on behalf of specific groups from which they find meaningful forms of identification. This is also how memory of the Holocaust may be shared to teach about the values that can be learned from the traumatic events experienced by people. The reframing treatment method provides a new meaning to the event. So we are not changing the fact, but we reinterpreting. And we all have experienced that we judge a person, a friend, a colleague, of doing something and we were quite angry, but then when we know a little bit about the circumstances, we say, oh, wow, I misinterpreted his or her behavior. So the fact that they have not changed, but the meaning, the framing of the event have changed. Now I'm going to talk about a very sensitive issue, forgetting. I have a whole lecture about the advantages of forgetting. And in these lectures, usually the crowd are 70 and above. They're very eager to hear about the advantages of forgetting. So it's a very popular lecture. So I'll just spend 1 or 2 slides on it. One of the giants of philosopher, William James, you know, in those days, philosophers, there was no distinction between philosophers and psychologists. Again, my degree is PhD, doctoral in philosophy. That's the roots. So this philosopher, William James, wrote an extraordinary book, you see, how long ago? More than a century ago. The Principles of Psychology. And it's unbelievable. The insight this person had, he didn't conduct research. He was a philosopher. But the insight he had, and still now, till these days, he's quoted on new findings. So, well, William James James already anticipated that. And one of those is, I'm quoting two statements about forgetting. Forgetting, in the practical use of our intellect, forgetting is as important a function as remembering. If we remembered everything, we should, on most occasions, be as ill off as if we remembered nothing. Okay, that's important to remember. Don't forget that. And a more recent researcher, James G. Meiga from UC Irving, University of California in Irving. You're already laughing. You read it before. Okay. If you used to go out with Bob and now you are married to Bill, you want to be able to say, I love you, Bill. That's why forgetting is important. Okay? And maybe it's a coincidence, maybe not, but the roots of forget and forgive are very similar. And I'll come back to Jim Meiga in a second in same context, but from a different angle. And what research has found these days about the advantages of forgetting, and again, if you compare it to a computer, you might say it's a disadvantage, you're losing information. But apparently, the research shows that forgetting has two major advantages. One is emotional, and one is cognitive. Let me just skip and come back to this slide. If you're interested, there are books written about people that have outstanding, superior autobiographical memory. I encourage you to look up at this 60 Minutes show. I mean, there are 2 episodes, actually, Endless Memory. And there they interview Jim Meiga, my colleague, and a group of people that they have an absolute memory. So, for example, this lady, all of them, actually, none of them is married except of this one. And they asked this lady, why aren't you married? She said, well, it's impossible. Why is that? And she said, listen, if I argue with my boyfriend and he says something wrong, I immediately have 1,000 examples of how many times he said certain things which I didn't like. And I become so furious and so angry that it's impossible. Okay? So we must forget in order to forgive. And it's amazing. I mean, when I say, I really encourage you to look at it, and it's on the web. So they can open a diary and say, October 7th, 94. She would say, it was a Wednesday, I had lunch with my friend, the weather was rainy, and they look, and she can tell you about the news as if it happened yesterday. And you could pick up any day in the last 3 decades. So at a certain point you say, wow, I envy that. But then no, when you listen to the interview with them, you see how they suffer. And that's exactly what's written in these books. So let's go back here. So forgetting is not a malfunctioning of the brain, but it's a process built into normal brain activity. It's actually an advantage. So one advantage is from an emotional point of view. As compared to enhancers, there was a study by a guy, a psychologist, Bonanno, following the 9/11, the Twin Towers in New York. And he studied 2 types of people that experienced the trauma. Once he called them the repressors, that they want to forget. And the other groups, how does he call them? Enhancers, okay? And what he found, as compared to enhancers, the repressors actually showed fewer signs of distress and faster adaptation, not only immediately, but after their loss, trauma, but also years later. And that's actually starting to change our perspective, even as psychologists. I know for many years I studied and taught that there's no such a thing. Repression is a bad thing. You should talk about the trauma. But what Bonanno is showing us in his studies, that no, repression is a legitimate process. And we know people from the Holocaust, survivors of the Holocaust, and some of them, they don't stop talking about their experiences, and others would never talk about it, maybe in the last years of their lives. But apparently it's not bad. Apparently, those that chose to be repressors, that's the good strategy for them. And they function better by forgetting, by repressing these memories. The advantages of forgetting from a cognitive point of view is also very interesting. Individuals with absolute memory have great difficulties in seeing the entirety of the things. They have difficulty abstracting, looking at things from 40,000 feet. They are so stuck with the details. They are so stuck with the very specific thing they cannot generalize. And all the tests that expect you to generalize, to think in symbolic way, they fail. So it's interesting, in some of these papers, they show a chart of their performance on various tests. So on all memory tests, their performance is way beyond, I mean, it's the maximum score. But on tests that tested abstraction, they are definitely don't have high scores. Okay, so cognitively as well, you must forget certain details in order to see the big pictures. If you're just dwelling with the details, it will be difficult for you to see the big picture. And this thing fits into other theories, making a distinction between verbatim versus gist or schematic memory. We have apparently in parallel we are forming two types of representations of the world. One focusing on details and the other on the gist, on the schematic, the big picture memories. And as we get older, that's studies of a colleague of mine from Israel, Moshe Nave Benjamin. As we become older, we are primarily the verbatim memory deteriorates, but not the schematic memory. I can share with you funny episodes. A friend of mine, a few years ago, came to me and said, my father is very old, and he has Alzheimer already. But, I don't understand. I mean, all the studies that you're studying, it's impossible to understand what's going on there. I said, what do you mean? He said, because sometimes he remembers everything, and sometimes he forgets everything. Well, I said, it doesn't make sense. I said, could you give me an example? He said, yes. His grandson was married 3-4 weeks ago, and I went to meet him, and we talked about it, and I told him if he remembers the wedding. And he said, sure. And he said, you won't believe. He told me everything, and he was so accurate. And I said, what did he tell you? And he told me that the bride and the groom looked so beautiful, and the wedding was so happy, and the food was excellent, and the dancing, and the atmosphere, and it was such a pleasure to meet everyone. And I said, listen, my friend, I could have told you the same thing without being at the wedding. So he had a schematic memory of what a wedding is. But he couldn't have remembered anything of that particular episode, of that particular event. So he had schematic memory. And that's sometimes very, very confusing. And bright people, that's how they compensate for their memory loss for many years. They have, they make up, they fill the gaps based on their intellect. So I want to summarize and integrate everything I was saying today. I want to start with a very, very provocative article published in 1988 by Professor Yehuda Elkanah, who is a historian, philosopher of science. Let's read it, because it's really, it's taking us back to the first goal of memory. I do not see a greater danger to the future of the State of Israel than the fact that the Holocaust was systematically and forcefully introduced into the consciousness of the entire Israeli public. For the first time, I understand the seriousness of our actions when for decades we sent every child in Israel to visit Yad Vashem again and again. What did we want tender children to do in with Israel, to do in these experiences? We recited with a closed mind and even a closed heart, and without interpreting. Remember, for what? What is the child supposed to do with these memories? For many, the horrific images may be interpreted as a call to hatred. Remember, can be interpreted as a call for continuous and a blind hatred. We must forget. I do not see a more important political and educational role for the leaders of this nation today than to stand on the side of life, to devote ourselves to building our future, and not to engage day and night in the symbols, rituals, and lessons of the Holocaust. They must root out the control of historical remember over our lives. Right? I mean, when he published this article, I mean, there were so many reactions, some of them supporting him, but most of them against. So I'm linking this with the first statement when I said the role of memory is survival. But when we overdo it, when we only focus on that, that could be dangerous, because then we become paranoid that everyone else is an enemy. Any stranger, anyone that doesn't look like us, is an enemy, and we have to be aware of it, to control, okay? And so I would say, instead of in favor of oblivion, I would say in favor of memory, because now we have a larger perspective. It is not enough to remember. On certain days, person who passes away, or the traumatic event we experience as community or as people, we must think about the consequences of remembering the past for our present and future. Memory as a survival mechanism is essential for the individual and for the public. But if these become the sole purpose of memory, then one must indeed fear the negative effects, as Elkanah suggested. But as we have seen, memory has other equally important processes and goals. We talked about knowledge, about collective identity, and moral lessons. So maybe as a society we have matured enough, just as we say as a person, individual person, when we get older, we have a broader perspective from 40,000 feet or iBird's view of the reality. We are not stuck with the details. So also as a nation, as a society, we have matured enough since the Holocaust and can now afford to deal less with the details and focus more on the pattern, the big pictures from bird's eye view, okay? So when we are down there busy with the details, we don't see the big picture, okay? Things that we see from above, we cannot see them when we are too close to the details. So we must take maybe sometimes a step back and learn and think what we can learn from the experience. So we're getting to the end of my talk. As in the individual memory, so too in collective memory, recollection can be utilized again, for example, on Memorial Day, to consolidate and reshape that the memory will evoke not only trauma and pain, but also other feelings in the spirit of the things we said above. If we learn, for example, during the days of commemoration of the Holocaust or any other commemorations, to engage in tolerance, acceptance of the other, and the fight against the racism, we will thereby enrich our collective memory. In this way, we will turn the pain and trauma into a constructive and empowering mechanism for both the individuals and society. And final note. regarding the question that we started with, what is the importance of remember or commemorate? Is mentioned as a person or an event is enough? Is mentioning of a person or event is enough? No. The answer is that the importance of remembering is in thinking about the consequences and the lessons from the past experiences for the present and the future of both the individuals and the community. Because our mental strength is no less important than our physical strength. And I want to end up with a personal note. Last Friday was a yahrzeit of my father. And I want to tell you that this process I went through, preparing this lecture, it wasn't prepared just for this event, but I've been giving it I'm invited quite often now, interestingly enough, not to talk about my scientific work, but to talk about this topic in front of generals and soldiers, because they realize that maybe this message has to get across youngsters as well, particularly serving in the army. And so I went through a transformation myself. I mean, since I participated as a member of that thinking group. And for example, after my father passed away, my father was not an educated person. I mean, we came from Tunisia. I was 2.5 years old when we made Aliyah to Israel. Unfortunately, because of the war and because of the immigration, he didn't have the opportunity to study. He had a very basic education, didn't go even to high school. But for him, it was very important that I would go to school. So the first years, at his yahrzeit, I would think of, oh, what a difficult life he went through. It's such a misery. I mean, leaving a place you were born, you loved, they loved. I mean, the Jews had a good life in North Africa. And coming and sacrificing so much. So I felt sad. And I said, oh, the more I feel sad, the better, because that's what's supposed to be, right, in the yahrzeit. You're supposed to feel sad, to be depressed. But then I figured, when I started to think about these issues, well, that's not how I want to remember my father as a victim. I want to remember other things. And to think of enough about one episode from my life that sheds light on his personality. And I want to tell you, when I grew up, I mean, you just had to go through elementary school, no obligation to go to high school. And from my class, I grew up in a village near Jerusalem, Mevasseret Yerushalayim. And 2 of us went to high school. Not because the other were not smart enough, but because their parents needed them to help with the economy, I mean, to work and to make some money. But my father decided, no, doesn't matter. I didn't study, but you're going to school. And I remember very frustrating experiences doing homework. I'm by myself. My other friend dropped out after 2 years of high school. Studying and preparing homework in chemistry, in physics, in mathematics. Very frustrated, unable to solve. I don't understand things. I look up at my father, and I really started to cry, not once, not twice. And then my father comes to me with his good eyes and big heart and hugs me and say, okay, Eli, it's legitimate, you could cry, but if you're thinking of giving up, then it's legitimate because, people would understand. You have all reasons. Your father cannot help you. I cannot help you. I don't know. I don't understand chemistry, physics, or the mathematics. Maximum I know how to multiply numbers. That's the maximum I studied. So you could give up. People will empathize with you, but you always in your life you'll be a victim. But you're a smart boy. You can it means you're not getting help. We don't have money to pay for tuition, for tutorial. So you simply have to work harder. And don't give up. Just work harder. And then you'll be proud of your achievements. And that became a motto of my life. And that's a motto which I try to transfer to my kids, to my students, to my patients. I mean, I'm a rehab psychologist. My clinical work is doing rehab, as was mentioned before, with veterans with head trauma. And I say, okay, these are the cards you're served, but you can feel sorry for yourself, okay? And you're right. You have many disadvantages, but you could try and struggle. So once I decided that I'm not going to think in that minutes or day of your side, I'm going to think about positive things and change the meaning of what remembering means. In closing remarks, we are here today as a tribute for Nitsa and for Robin's Spiro. And unfortunately, I didn't know Robin. I never met him. But I heard so much about what you have done together, the achievements. You are dreamers. You have visions. You have done so many good things for the family, for the community, Jewish community, non-Jewish community, for the community in England, for Israel. So thinking about Robin, thinking about the past, it's good, but we have to think about the present, the implications of what these people are doing, what Robin and Itz are doing to us for today, but not only for the present, but the power, the empowerment that they give us for the future as well. And that is memory. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eli. Instead of the flowers, a reward for the fascinating talk, which was so full of so much. And I think we need to invite you back to do more on the forgetting one, seeing the reaction that got. So thank you all. It's now my pleasure to introduce to you Nitsa Spiro, our tributor of the evening.
Age. Usually, it's terrible not to see anybody. No, but it's the darkness, which is, it's dark. That's better. Usually I don't speak with papers. Usually I try to be spontaneous, and that comes right from my heart. But I know that tonight, it's going to be difficult. So I thought that if I write it down, perhaps it will be easier for me to cope with whatever I want to say. I'm speaking here on behalf of Robin and myself, and I feel that Robin is not only here, but in our heart and in your heart as well. In the popular psalm on the rivers of Babylon, there is one verse relating to today's topic. If I forget thee, Jerusalem, let my right hand wither. I have my own version of this vow. If I ever forget anyone who was good to me or to mine, let my right hand wither, regardless on how big or small this good deed was. So, of course, we are indebted to the Peirce Foundation for finding us worthy of this great honor of an annual prestigious tribute, to the JW3, which is hosting these events, and in particular to the man who stands at the helm and navigates this extraordinary cultural center. but we admire him also for his ability to detect right from wrong and have the courage to state it publicly. Judy, the efficient and reliable, yet always warm and understanding. Working with you, Judy, is never less than a treat. And of course, if I was allocated more time, Eli, I could have speak about you for hours. I'm standing here in front of you in the lime, and I'm thinking to myself with no false modesty, what a farce. Why us? So many people around are far more talented and worthy. So I have to assure you that we, Robin and I, know that this evening doesn't belong to us only, but to each and every person who joined us in the proving of different roads to go, which at the time was a unique concept of education towards finding a new key to coming closer to one's own Jewish identity without guilt of not necessarily fitting into the mold, and to non-Jews who wish to discover the uniting rather than the divisive. So this is a tribute focused on us, must share first of all, I must share first of all with our unique family. I hope you'll have a chance to meet them afterwards. Our children, their well-chosen partners, our grandchildren of quality, their unfailing support made us feel that we are not bad parents either. Our gratitude to all those who helped us achieve the dream, to our power behind the scene, to the people who are the power, who were and are the power behind the scene, our administrative assistants who got the bug of the vision, even if not Jewish, teachers, and all the many historians, authors, philosophers, musicians, artists, filmmakers, theater people, the ones who donated from pennies to greater sums, and those who volunteered their time and ideas, thousands of students, and those who flocked to our cultural events, to our over 50 international and national tours of Jewish interest. Without you all, there would have been no groundbreaking work and no tributes. But in this category of people without whom we wouldn't have survived and fulfilled part of our vision, much more is still left to give, I'm afraid, stands a very special man, yeah, you can see, to whom I dedicated this evening, David Perlman. In fact, he was originally meant to be the speaker at this year's tribute, telling us about his amazing collection of postcards of Jewish interest divided between pre-state Israel and the rest of the world. His collection of nearly, I think I'm probably saying a lower number than it is, I said around 200,000, now a part of the Hebrew University, invaluable research material. Sadly, very sadly, David, thank you. David passed only a short while ago and deprived us all of memorable meeting with him. I need to explain our debt to him in more detail. when ego-driven and powerful-seeking people felt that it would be beneficial for them to wipe the Spiros off the map, it was he who approached us, reassuring us that we are not goner and we are not going to disappear, as we were capable and very needed. To start us afresh, he let us use his huge basement at Centrum, his international accountancy firm. It housed over 4,000 books of ours. He gave us an office, a meeting, and a classroom space. We were flying again, and even higher than before. May David's memory be blessed, and may he be a beacon of inspiration to all of us to stand by worthy ideals and by people in whom we strongly believe. And to end the evening, you are going to have a huge surprise. I think that many of you, if not all, know the legendary Thelma Ruby. What I have to say about Thelma, it cannot be said in words. She is shortly celebrating her 98th birthday. Thelma, the beautiful Thelma, who lives in south of London, was not deterred by the fact that it's a very cold day, that the distance is very distant, far, and that it's a late night event. Thelma understands what friendship is, and Thelma is here with us. If we are talking about memory, what Thelma is going to give you is not only a memory of a wonderfully long friendship, but also an event that she needed for a skit. She needed a man. The man that was supposed to be with her was ill at the time. She phoned me and she said, "Can you lend me your man to be on the stage?" Well, what can you do with Thelma asked? Of course, I lent her Robin for the day. Well, this time I thought that when we are talking about memory, it would be lovely to remember that event, to remember Robin sitting with her on the stage. But there was a problem. I needed to find a man. Unfortunately, I don't have my man to lend anymore. So I was looking around and thinking, I need to have Thelma. So what man can I lend? And then, would you believe it? I found it. I found not it, but him. And you are going to have a surprise. And this surprise is the great Thelma and the great he, who are going to be here in a minute and give us Thelma's skit with Robin. I just want to say that people say that you can be recognized by who your friends are. And I say that seeing all of you, so many have been assistants, PAs, teachers, colleagues, friends, composers, musicians, artists, who built together with us this, what has been a legendary experience of life. So thank you for being these friends that gives us the pride of being who we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Nitsa. If our 2 stars would like to come. Oh, what about that? Sorry, not now, because we need to.
One chair on either side. That's
Right, first side. Oh, we don't sit. We
Can you hear me without a microphone?
No, no.
Oh,
Sorry.
sure. All right, I use a microphone then. First of all, I must tell you that my partner is making his theatrical debut tonight.
I wasn't trained for that. But I couldn't refuse.
Secondly, he has no idea what's going to happen. He made me very nervous during his speech because he said forgetting was a good thing. And I just hope I get through my skit, because at my age, you never know. But I'm going to do my best, and I'm going to drag him with me. Now, here, the scene is a cocktail bar at about 5 o'clock in the evening. You, my friend, are standing, just having a drink, minding your own business, and suddenly, come here first. Move this back a little. No, just here. That's right. You're over here, and I'm over here. All right. Peter Parsons! Oh, as I live and breathe. Well, fancy seeing you. You remember me, of course. I'm Sally Hughes. It must be 10 years since we met, but you haven't changed, my pet. Come on, sit down and tell me all your news. Oh, Peter, you just couldn't be looking sweeter. Are you keeping fit? Well, obviously you are. Can you come further down so I don't have to look up at you? Thank you very much. And I can go up a bit.
Okay,
A little further down. Thank you.
you're the boss.
Now, you've no idea what's happening, okay?
Okay.
I'm just giving you a little direction. Right, we'll start again. Oh, Peter, you just couldn't be looking sweeter. Are you keeping fit? Well, obviously you are. How long are you in town? Don't you think I'm looking brown? I've just been to Monte Carlo in the car. Have you ever been to Monte? Isn't it sweet? I went with Auntie. You remember Auntie May? Oh, wasn't she a yell? She's the one you used to say, look just like your dapple grey. By the way, what happened to that horse, dear? Remember that last ride, dear, and you got that lovely idea, and I got home with my jodhpurs soaked in dew. Oh, wasn't Mummy furious? And you know it's curious, I've never felt ashamed of it, have you? Well, really, there's no need to. I've just never paid much heed to the conventions or the penalties incurred. So you mustn't say you're sorry for that evening in the quarry. No, please, my dear, don't say another word. Oh, Peter, isn't it marvellous to meet a childhood sweetheart, don't you think? Of course you do. Remember when we parted? Weren't you simply broken-hearted? Well, of course you were, my dear. Me too. Remember telling Mother we were made for one another? But she didn't believe us, did she? But it's true. And you're still my favourite flame. I don't suppose you feel the same, or do you? Oh, Peter, dear, you do. So that was why you tarried. You mean you never married? Oh, Peter, darling Peter, nor did I. I just saved myself for you, dear. I felt I wanted to, dear. Oh, Peter, darling Peter, please don't cry. No more need for tears and sorrow, dear. I'll marry you tomorrow. Is that all right? No, say the 23rd. No, Peter, dear, don't thank me. Just let me find my hanky. No, please, my dear, don't say another word. Oh, Peter, my life couldn't be completer. Let's start making plans, dear, right away. Do you want a quiet wedding? I must see about some bedding. Or should we stay a while with Auntie May? No. Straight after the marriage, we can catch a train to Harwich. And we'll stay with Mummy for a month or two. Well, you needn't look like that. Mummy's got a lovely flat. And I'm sure she's always most polite to you. Very different from your mother and your nasty little brother. You've got very little room to scorn and scoff. I won't sit here like a dummy while you insult poor Mummy. If you feel like that, we better call it off. Oh, I'm glad you spoke your mind out. And I'm very glad to find out how you felt before the wedding day occurred. And to think you nearly lured me into marriage. Well, that's cured me. No, please, my dear, don't say another word. Okay. I think we better say goodbye.
Yeah, let me give you my card.
What's this, your card?
Yeah.
But why? Professor Eli Vakil? But that's absurd. Do you mean you're not Peter?
No.
Well, you might have been discreeter. That's the most ill-mannered thing I ever heard. How could you sit there and just never say a word? Take a bow. Thank you very much.
Wow. What a different way to end our trivia evening. We've never had a star like that. Thelma, we want to book you. You have to come back. Eli, thank you so much. An amazing talk, full of information. And Nitsa, you managed to speak yet again beautifully. Thank you for my thank yous. I would like to take this opportunity to thank my colleagues who've made this evening possible. Greg over here, Kishan and Max over there, Sarah over here, and the ones behind the scene, especially Miriam Zahava, who actually did the logistics. And just thank you to the pairs, of course, again, and Nitsa and your family. Now I invite you to our reception, as usual, which is outside in the restaurant, where Ellie's happy to talk to you, take any questions you have, and we can fate Thelma for her amazing performance, which would have been amazing had you been in your 70s, but to hear what age you are, we are in absolute awe. So thank you, everyone, for coming. We wish you a safe journey home and look forward to seeing you back at JW3 very soon.